What we're going to do quickly is maybe just the three of us will introduce ourselves, and our hope is to keep this a little bit more conversational. And I'm sure there's a lot of you who have questions. It feels like everyone was prepped with questions. That's what Malika was sharing before. But just to get a sense of the room before we start introductions, how many of you are current fellows right now? Okay, wonderful. And then we have some alum, and I can see the colorful one is staff, right? The staff got the most colorful. Okay, wonderful. So we'll introduce ourselves, but I think all three of us would also want to hear what you were really keen to, what brought you here to the conversation as well. So I'll start off from then. So I was a Teach for India Fellow in 2013. I was a Teach for India Fellow for a few years and then a program manager, and then I started working with an organization called Simple Education Foundation. Good knowledge, that means some people are familiar, where I work mostly with government school teachers, public school educators. So we work in schools and we work with state governments for teacher professional development and bringing instructional coaches, like you have amazing program managers, bringing that at scale with different state governments. And we work in 3 geographies, which is Delhi, Punjab and Uttarakhand, so 3 states. Very diverse. So yeah, urban, up rural in the mountains and plains. So just trying to capture India, and that's how we want to continue working with teacher professional development. Thank you. And yeah, over to Nalika.
Many of you know me. I think I was meant to be having a colorful lanyard, but I kept my institute black one. I'm Nalika Briganza, so I did my fellowship in 2012 in Mumbai, and then have been working on staff ever since. And currently I work on the training team, so that's everything from student curriculum and assessments to institute to the fellow journey, right from institute till graduation. And over the last 2 months, this is my most special memory at this point. Over the last 2 months, I feel very, very lucky to be able to say I've been somebody's Didi. So all the kids on stage yesterday. So I'm still feeling a little bit in that Didi mode, but I feel like that's still, I love my current role, but I think I love the Didi role just a little bit more.
I think I've got one. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Farr. We're saying years. I was a 1993 fellow at the beginning of Teach for America. I taught on the border of Texas and Mexico, and I had the experience that we hope everyone has, that it sort of changed the shape of my life. I went to law school and studied education equity and civil rights, and I taught civil rights at Georgetown Law School for a little bit. But what leads me 20 whatever years later to this chair is I spent about 10 years leading training and support at Teach for America, during which I helped develop and wrote this Teaching as Leadership book that has been used by various organizations, including Teach for India. And as Teach for All kind of emerged, and Shaheen showed up in New York and like, we're doing this, and Chile showed up and all this, I slid over to Teach for All and have been leading something called the Global Learning Lab, where we try to find transformational classrooms in all of our programs and crowdsource the studies of those classrooms to say, what do they have in common?
Okay. I wish we could do introductions everywhere because I would just feel close. But just to get us started off, I've been appointed the role of the moderator, but I'm taking the easy way out and we're going to self-moderate today. So I would love to source from you all, and just maybe if a couple of people could just share, maybe 2 or 3 folks could share, what were you really looking for, or what drew you into this space, or what were you seeking when you signed up for this session or for this space? And if anyone wants to just share. And I'll pass this around. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, we all signed up, so yeah. I hope.
Hi, so I run a learning center in a village in UP, and we work with community youth and we train them to teach. So I think for me, it was more to understand how the training frameworks work and how you developed it because we're now kind of doing that with the community youth. So that's why I'm here.
How the training
Yeah.
get developed.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Maybe something different? That's the only question.
Almost a similar line. Almost on
Similar lines. Okay, so how do like the history, the origin stories of training frameworks? Anything else that there was any other curiosity or something that you wanted to learn about, talk about in this space?
We run schools, and so the teaching community, I feel, is the teaching role is extremely hard. So how can a sense of community be built through, and what is that something that is getting evolved in? Because when we're looking at teaching, when we're evaluating with rubrics and multiple frameworks, it's hard to capture what does collective how do you feel a sense of community in what you do, and how do you capture that. I'm here to understand that.
I mean, I think I'm going to add a question because I feel like just all my little and big interactions with you, Stephen, over the years, I feel like there's just been so much to learn. And I'm thinking of what the community could benefit from. But I feel like your work with just trying to not necessarily define or codify, I don't want to use that word, but to paint a picture of what it means to be an excellent teacher and how that's evolved over time. And what led to that evolution as well. I feel like that's something that would be really beneficial for this group because we're always thinking about like what is excellent teaching and how is that shifting year on year, sometimes week on week. But I feel like you have a lot of value to add to that, and I've experienced like just a lot of learning from that.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask around. So I've read the book, very inspired by it. I was a 2019 fellow also in Bombay. So currently I work with teacher trainers and teachers also themselves. So when there are changes in context and like as the learning styles also evolve, how do you sort of present a kind of framework to teachers and not actually have them follow it as a template? Like how do you build that mindset in the people? Because when we share a framework, we almost make it obvious that this is something we want you to follow, but then we also tell you that you're free to do it as your own because you're a teacher of that class. So I think there's a struggle over there. So if you can share a little bit on that.
Hello everyone, my name is Shikha. I have been a fellow in Teacher in the Delhi team. Something I've been thinking about for the past few months is like how do we as teachers be continuous learners and how do we improve ourselves? And I think very similar to what Shohini shared here, I think sometimes when we have a certain framework, it gets very structured, and instead of being really present into a classroom and seeing the little magics, we tend to look what we are here to look for instead of what's really happening. So I'm just thinking about how do we really balance both, because both is equally important. So that is something I'm really looking forward to learn.
I think we have some things to start us off. I think what we were hearing here was just, kind of the origins of the framework. And I would think a lot of people would benefit into where did TAL really come from? What was the idea behind it? And then as we evolve, what's the use cases, the flexibility, the autonomy to apply it? How structured should we be? How flexible should we be? Those are questions. And then something about really as a community, how do we build that kind of community and what's the role that these frameworks can play? But maybe we can start with you, Stephen, just with the history, because you just said 93, right? So, we can start. When I was 3 years old.
Oh,
So we
Yeah.
can start with just
yeah.
the
Well, we don't
history.
have to go that long history.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me start with some feelings. I don't know how many miles away I am from home. Claire's here watching this, but I've had dozens of people walk up to me in the last 3 days and shake my hand and say, "Your book was such a help. It was so important to this." And I'm thinking, I don't believe in that book anymore. And that's a really weird feeling, right? It is both true that all of that, like, I'm still very proud of that work, and I want to share a little bit about that. But I also think it's just so incomplete and not what the world is calling for. And so I'm in a weird place speaking with you all. This is like going to be a midlife crisis or something right here in this room with you. The very short version of that is that there's a little bit of history and context. I happened to be teaching in Texas in 1993 when the governor of Texas was a man named George Bush, who would later become president. And for all of the political reasons I disagree with George Bush, one thing he did is he said we need to have some outcomes in education, because there were none. In the US context, we did not know how students were doing on reading, writing, math. It was like a dark room. That was it. What we compared was the inputs. How much money are we spending? How many books are in the library? Do they have computers? That's how we decided whether school was good. In fact, when I went to law school and studied civil rights in the United States, there's a very famous case called Brown that was about desegregation, where they said black kids actually can go to school with white kids. It was entirely decided on inputs, not outputs. What the Supreme Court said is it's not fair that white kids have libraries and black kids don't, so you have to go together. No one was talking about whether white kids and black kids can read at the same level. I was in the first state that brought tests, standardized tests, where we could actually see where kids could read, and for all of you know, it was shocking and it was horrifying that white kids in 8th grade were reading better than black and brown kids who were graduating from high school or not graduating, right? So I say that to say I grew up as a teacher obsessed with the possibility of knowing whether students were learning. That data was magic. I just was like, oh my gosh, we can actually see it. Teaching as leadership, can I just say, like, I am not offended if you've never heard of this book or this framework. How many people have heard of teaching as leadership as a framework? Okay, enough people to know a little bit about what this is. Very basically, it's a rubric that is a map for teachers of what actions grow academic achievement in students. That's the basic idea. The history of it was that first Wendy, and then she hired me, we went around and we found classrooms in the United States where now we started to have this data, right? This was pretty exciting. I get a call from North Carolina that says we have a teacher here whose students grew 3.5 years of reading in 1 year. Wow, let's go look at that classroom and see what they're doing. And another one somewhere else who grew 2 years, whatever. And we're studying these classrooms that are getting dramatic academic achievement. And what I mean by studying is I go in the room and I watch and I write down in my notebook what I see the teacher doing. And I do it over and over and over. And I see patterns and I think, oh, there's something common here. We can be helpful. Let's make a rubric based on what teachers are doing that get dramatic academic achievement. We made the Teaching as Leadership rubric. We made it very concrete. It exploded. I'm actually going to tell you a very small story that nobody knows. Some of you may have seen it's a book like published by an actual publisher. We wrote that book as the training manual for our summer institute. And in those days, there was nothing digital, so you had to make copies of it. So I would take it to Kinko's, I don't know if that's an international company, where you make copies. And with my work Amex card, I would get 3,500 copies of this manual. It would be like $80,000 on my credit card. A publisher saw us doing that and saying, hey, we could publish this as a book for way cheaper. That was the only reason it got published. Like, it wasn't like, we want to spread this out. It was like, we'll give it to you looking like a book for 75 cents, and then we can sell it a little bit, whatever. So just to give you a sense, like, this wasn't some kind of attempt to push it out. It was just like, we're spending a lot of money on copies. By the way, I got to keep all the points, and I had this giant desk. The desk I still have, I got because of all the money I was spending on copies for this thing. Anyway, that framework, it really did take off. It was very popular because lots and lots of new teachers are desperate for guidance about what to do tomorrow. And this was a map from good teachers to say, here's some things that we know will work. And in that sense, I'm very proud of it. And I got lots of attention about this. You all, like, there were articles in national magazines, I was on national news, whatever. It was a bucket list. I kind of wrote a book and it got all this attention. It was all great. Okay. I'm going to ask a question, just to ask you to think about it for a minute. Framework number one, let's call it teaching as leadership, is answering the question, what do teachers do to get academic achievement? And that framework is created by me. Framework number one. Framework number two asks a different question. It asks, what's happening in and around schools and classrooms where students are growing as leaders of a better future for themselves and their communities? And the way we study that is we ask 5,500 people from 37 countries to virtually visit classrooms in 4 countries to say, what patterns do you see on that question? All right, so the first question, the inputs were teacher actions, the outputs were academic achievement, and I was the one scribbling it down. And the other one, the inputs were, we don't know, we're going to see what's happening in and around classrooms, and the outcomes were much broader defined. Students are growing as leaders of a better future in their lives and for their communities, and the people who held the pen were 5,500 people all around the world. What do you think would be different about those two frameworks that come out of that? We just actually think about that and come up with an answer, because I'm going to ask people to yell it out. Like, one might have more of this and one might have more of that, one might have less of this, one might have more of that. But if those are the two frameworks, what would be different, do you expect, in what would come out of those two very different questions and ways of studying? Let's get 3 or 4 people. I'm not calling them people. This is like open mic. Be courageous. What for example?
Can you repeat what was the second?
Yeah. Let me just repeat the whole thing again. The first one, the question was, what are teachers doing to get to academic achievement? And I'm studying it. The second one is, what's happening in classrooms where students are growing as leaders of a better future? And we crowdsource the studies of it. All right, what do you think would show up differently in those two models?
In the second model, I think we're noticing a lot about our students' action and what our students are really doing in the classroom. So it's about what are they behaving, how are they learning, the different styles they are learning, and how is it contributing to them. So maybe the focus is a lot more on their actions and the way they are learning.
Yep.
as compared to the first.
Yeah. What else? Yeah.
I think the second one is just not towards academic achievements, but like a student's development in the classroom,
Yep.
like meaning self, like
Yeah.
how they interact with peers,
Yeah.
how they regulate their emotions.
Yeah.
So like a whole of it.
Yeah.
So knowing that, I think, would give like a better idea of what we call like a holistic development of a child.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to that. Keep going. Yeah.
I'm also thinking that since in the second scenario, it's been crowdsourced, multiple opinions are going to come up, maybe they'll be clashing. So there would be some sort of lack of clarity in the teachers. But here, because only one person is doing, it's very objective, it's just like one way of looking at it. May have its own pros and cons, but I think this one would be a lot more clearer for the teachers.
And what if that one person, just hypothetically, was like a white, upper middle class, straight male who
Yeah,
spoke
yeah.
English in a country where every identity he had was privileged?
Yes,
Like, what
definitely
might
not
happen?
inclusive then. Yeah.
And how might that affect what comes out of it? Like, I'm like, you can't offend me, I promise. But this is the question.
I feel in the second one there'll be a lot more contexts for people to pick from. It is not one person's context based on 10, 15, 100 or 1,000 contexts they visited, but here it would, since it is crowdsourced, it will be a lot of contexts that I can pick and choose from versus here assuming it's you have distilled all the context and created one blueprint that you think would work en masse versus
Yeah.
here I get to pick and choose, oh, this seems like something that is more in context to my geography, to my
Yeah.
to me as an individual, to my children, etc. And I also think in the first one probably it'll be a little more for what the teacher actions could look like. Of course, yes, we'd also be able to see what students are doing, and like a lot of other people said, it'll be academic. And the second one, it could also be like we get to get a little more sense of, okay, this is what I did and this is what, because it'll be multiple contexts. I'm also sharing what I did, why I did. So then I know what the outcome was, which means that I know how students are growing, which includes holistic and not, because not every teacher might be focusing on academic outcomes at a given point in time,
Yeah.
depending upon where they are in their journey. For them, it could be a lot of other things. So framework, yeah, like by like a certain point, I feel like I will use the framework to suit my this, in which case then this becomes a far more
Yep.
useful resource to fall back on.
I think the first one will bucket fit a type of a teacher. That will sort of say, "Ki, I'm going to follow this rubric and this is how my class will show up, and hence either I meet these outcomes or I don't meet these outcomes." So I think it will bucket fit one kind of a teacher. It won't have space for more teachers to come in who probably those challenges aren't captured in the framework. The latter one will have more opportunities for capturing what different forms of teaching might be needed, and also sort of not bucketing what excellent teaching might look like in different contexts, where probably there might be a school where they are not taking any written assessments, but their metrics for success would look very different to another school. And I think it gives space for more of that. I think the latter one would also give more space for more teachers to know about each other's work, and in turn form smaller pockets of learning communities, which otherwise in this one framework, it's very difficult to form.
Let's just get one or two more if we can.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think for me, when I use TAL as a teacher and then as a teacher trainer, I have heavily relied on it. I feel like in the first context, I lost creativity in work because I knew, okay, if if this is the problem, then I go back to talent. This is what I need to do, and then pick that up and sort of use it for myself, and then also use it for my teachers. And it worked, right? Like it worked for a new teacher. It worked for somebody who was just stepping into it and needed more structure and needed more support that way. It also helped me when I started off as a teacher trainer, because for me also it gave me a structure, but I feel like the more in depth of teaching that I went, I lost creativity. I feel like in the second one there would be more room and more scope for creativity, because there are a lot of people, other people like Shweta mentioned, that smaller pockets of educators coming together and sort of designing it. So what more, like, okay, we've reached point A, now 0 to 1 we've reached, now I need to go from 1 to 10. So how do I do that? I think for me that didn't work. Like I lost sight of that when I was using the rubric.
Yeah, I think apart from everything that people have said and based on the brief conversations I also had with you, I think one thing is that what I felt when I was also using TEL was it was restricted heavily towards academic achievement. And as somebody who is passionate about student leadership, I always used to be confused about should I build stronger leaders inside the classroom versus academic achievement, because specifically in India, academic achievement is such a big thing. I'm just wondering, can both be done simultaneously together? And also because in my experiences, the best teachers I've seen actually have both.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's what I'm a little leaning towards.
Yeah, let me take the mic back for a minute and just say yes, right? Like that's basically what happened. But and I mean, every one of you mentioned something that we could go deeper into. You know, there's a lot of messiness in the second one. Like you can't take the input of 5,500 people without somebody just organizing it, right? We got a committee of 26 people from all 5 continents to do that, and it was hard, and we disagreed. You know, one of the fights was about whether the word love should be on the page. Like, truly a big fight. Another one was the word agency, which means different things in different parts of the world. And like, you know, there's all these kinds of things that happened, but we eventually got to something, and that is what we're calling teaching as collective leadership. I would not even call it a framework, because I think of a framework as here's something that to guide your actions. What we have now is actually a map of patterns around the globe, and what you do with it is kind of up to you. But if you are going to say, I'm going to do everything in this, I think you might die, because this is not, right? What we have is, we have a map of something we've never seen in a single classroom. Think about that, right? This is the conglomerated beauty of the strongest classrooms all around the world, and no single classroom looked like this, but they were all incredible. So what do we do with that, right? You have to, it's like this thing is I think it's fantastic for provoking critical reflection about your own practice, about our programs, but I sort of live in fear of treating it like we did teaching as leadership, which I was the head of training and support. I was like, we're going to go into every classroom in this country, and we're going to see where people are, and they're going to move, and we did. Like, we could move people up, and we mapped all the data, and blah, blah, blah. And you know what? If you got better on teaching as leadership, academic achievement went up. It worked. I promise I'm going to stop talking, but the midlife crisis is this. What teaching as leadership does, and what I think most systems in the world do, is get to academic achievement at the expense of students' well-being, connectedness, agency, and awareness. When we visit those outlier classrooms, like these are people you know, right? There's probably some of you in this room. I don't mean to leave people out of this, right? But the Poojas of the world, Gaurav, Sanaya's classroom. I have been in some classrooms in this country that were counter-systemic. And I'm talking counter-teach for India, counter-government, If there's a bell curve, they're way over here. Every one of them is doing what you're saying. It's not that they don't even say we're doing both. They're saying, no, no, no. The path to real mastery is through students' well-being, connectedness, and awareness, and agency. It's not at the expense of those things. And there's a way to teach that way. It's just not what the system values. And it's really hard, and I feel really alone. But it's a much more fulfilling way to be. We hear that all over the world, right? So I'm just going to go full radical crazy here. I believe we have systems that, because they value academic achievement at the expense of students' connectedness and agency, and that's what they were designed to do. We have inherited systems from 1 or 2 countries around the world that have been spread to every other country that are perpetuating divisions of power and privilege among people and are putting us on a race to existential challenges for humanity. And I think if we spend our time perfecting the systems we have, the seas will never stop rising. We will never be able to address pandemics. Wars will continue, like all of that. I really do believe that. And if we're going to have a more just, equitable, sustainable world, we cannot have systems that teach kids to read and write by taking away their well-being, connectedness, and agency. So we have no choice but to ask, how do we do that well? And that makes me really depressed. And then I realize the knowledge is out there. It's just not in a book, and it's not at Oxford. It's in those teachers who are already doing it, the teachers and students. So if we can find them, connect them, learn from them, and follow them, it's so hopeful, right? I felt that last night at that show, honestly. Like, it was that same sort of feeling. Oh, there are people who are doing this differently already. And we need to just find them, learn from them, and go with it. So, yeah, I'll be done. I can show you what this thing looks like. We can, there's a million resources coming out from this. But this is why, when those of you have come up and said teaching as leadership was so important to me, I think I'm so glad. And it's just so incomplete that I don't think it's what the world is calling for. And a lot of my colleagues and friends dramatically disagree with me. And they hear about this and they think, anytime you talk about things beyond academic achievement, you're diluting academic achievement. And you're inhibiting students' ability to compete and win in the world that exists in favor of some idealized world that doesn't exist, and you're hurting kids. And that's where I am right now. Your turn.
I'll share, just the last bit really resonated with me, because every day I work with the government, and for them it's just for us as a government, it's academic achievement. The government works in mission mode, and even though my heart most strongly, and the person that I am and the teacher that I am most strongly aligns with the idea of teaching as collective leadership, and the second piece, the second framework. But the reality, the truth of the way that the public school education does work is that a lot of times that there is sometimes that urgency that is needed, or the gap is so high for children. And I see myself, over the years, I have used TAL as well as gone to the different resources that have come out. Oftentimes, and I honestly find that there has been merit in both, because a lot of times when I just give a lot of teachers choice, honestly, they get overwhelmed. They get overwhelmed and they get confused. And when a teacher is struggling, especially a novice teacher, she just wants an answer. She's like, please help me. don't make me do all this work and do all of this. I am struggling. I am dying here. I have 60 kids in my classroom and I just need an answer. I don't need you to put me in a reflective space right now or help me figure it out. I need your help. And she's asking me for help. And at that point, that choice does happen that, okay, I know that you need to do this, then you do this, and then you ask this question and you're good to go. And I know I have that. And that's been the thing for me, like balancing, just giving that room for exploration, room for creating, room for context, but also at times just like give the answer. That's more helpful. So I do resonate, but at that I have found myself seeing merit in both ways, and especially for novice teachers, I would say in my own work today, I do still leverage the teaching as leadership framework quite a bit. And Nalika, I know we were also like catching up downstairs with the coffee, and I know you also have explored both things, and you also have thoughts about this. So yeah, Stephen, you invited us to agree, disagree. So we are going to just also share what has worked in our context. But yeah, Nalika, I would just love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking so much of like what to say. But I mean, the honest truth, at least my truth, is that I feel like with any framework, a lot of it rests on how you choose to use it. I know, so in my first year of the fellowship in 2012, we had the Teaching as Leadership framework. Very honestly, it was helpful to me. It was really helpful. It helped me see early success. It gave me the answers I needed to feel like I can do this, you know. And at that moment, that was important to me. What I completely agree with is that the vision of student success was extremely narrow. In the second year of my fellowship is when our first student vision scale was launched, right? And that had like academic achievement, culture of achievement, values and mindsets, exposure and access. Anyone from the older cohorts will be like, yeah, I remember those words. But I think what I learned in my second year is that I could use the principles from teaching as leadership and a more broad, like a more holistic vision for student achievement and student learning and growth. And I could still get to those outcomes or to that vision. And so for me, the evolution was one of, this is what a teacher needs to do, just do it. And I got my kids from the windows to their chairs. And in the second year, it was like, okay, now that's not real success. Like, what could success look like? Use the same principles. So I definitely think that there are parts of the teaching as leadership framework that I feel strongly about. Like when someone says the word work relentlessly, it like it, it reaches my heart. I feel like, yes, work relentlessly. And when someone says continuously improve effectiveness, I'm like, yes, every day, continuously improve effectiveness. So I feel like there are some of those words, some of those terms that I've sort of internalized. That is perhaps just because I used it as I was teaching as well. So that could also be why. But that was my journey with TAL. And I think that post that, I remember getting on those calls even with like you and Taylor and so many people across the world. I found those conversations equally enriching. And I know that what has come of it, we were working on the leadership and teaching framework at the same time, actually. So if you look at the two, you'll see, I think, some similarities. But what it did is it really broadened my horizon of like what I consider to be excellent. Having said that, I really think both of them have their own place. So very similar to what Chandni said, I feel like they have their own place, and I wouldn't let go of one entirely. Yeah, those are my honest.
But what do you feel are the limitations of TAL?
I think with TAL, I feel like there are a few big changes apart from like the holistic nature of student achievement, Stephen, that I feel like the new framework brings in, right? One of them, very, very important, which did not exist in TAL, was inner work. And I found that to be incredibly valuable. I don't think I personally did a lot of inner work in my own fellowship. I was like, reflect one more time, reflect one more time. But post that, I found how valuable it was. I found that who you are as a leader is who you are as a person, who you are as a teacher is who you are as a person, and we teach who we are. And so I began to see the value of like turning inward. I think another one is who decides what the vision is. Is it the teacher in isolation? Is it the teacher with the community? Is it the community? Is it the students? And so who decides, I think, was the second very, very big difference for me. And there are many more, but these are the two that stand out. So, yeah.
I want to comment on that, and it's weird for me to be the one who says you're wrong about teaching as leadership, because I can't be, right? Like, if it's valuable, it's valuable. But I do want to share a thought. I don't know, we don't have enough for everybody. Like, maybe take every other one or three or what, just a peek so you can see kind of what came out of it. But let me just challenge you two for a second.
Sure.
I think your attraction to teaching as leadership is not its content, but its form. I think what you like is how concrete it is. And if something aligned to broader outcomes had the same altitude of concreteness, you would not be hanging on to it. I feel the same way about Teach Like a Champion, right? Like, Teach Like a Champion is, I mean, Doug Lemov outsold my book 1,000 billion times to one, right? It's so popular. I don't think people are asking about its purpose. I think they are attracted to how tactical it is. So to me, the challenge is, how do we take what we're learning about what it takes to get to academic achievement through broader outcomes and make it as actionable as teaching as leadership was? I see you nodding your heads, but you were talking about like, no, there's some things good from here, some things good from there. I'm just wondering if what you think about that hypothesis.
For me, I do agree with the bit about just it being concrete and actionable, because teaching as leadership, as there were some words as well, I would be like that would also in the teaching as leadership thing. Like, I think the piece on classroom management, that would bother me a lot, because it wasn't representative of the students' culture. Or for me, I would always think that children don't need to be managed. Certain things that would contradict my cultural values as an Indian as well. But then the concreteness and that, okay, now you know next step. And when you're just a new teacher who has not, you're not actually, you've not been trained, or you've not like, you don't have a degree in teaching, and then you just need something to keep you going. So the actionable, the concreteness, and also what's next. Okay, I got this, and then what's the exact next step I need to do? So it almost served as like, in a way, a cheat code, that, okay, it'll get me through, and you feel very alone in the classroom at times. So I do think the actionable nature of it, which it was very concrete, but also like, I'm here and I need to go here next. When there is so much anxiety and overwhelm, it gives you structure and direction. And I do think as a very young, new teacher, that gives you an element of safety. So that did help. I would agree with that notion. And that is something that I do feel like if that was a part of the teaching as collective leadership, it would be something I would use a lot more, because never are my conversations with any teacher ever limited to academic achievement. And that's usually a very little part of any classroom observation. That's usually not I don't spend a lot of my time talking about that. Uh, yeah, so I do tend to resonate with what you're sharing.
I don't know, Stephen. I mean, so I, as I was using the rubric, I liked it. Post that, I've looked at many rubrics, created some. I've actually begun to grow less fond of rubrics now today. I think what I actually found the most valuable was the TAL website. And on the website, there were examples of this is a like so everybody's gone on that site. I'm like, okay, what does the plan look like? For me, I guess it was more the examples that were readily available to say, okay, there's a description here and that's fine, but I want to see a concrete example of what it feels like, what it looks like, what I can do. That was what gave me the clarity.
Yeah.
And I think not to say that this one isn't just as I feel like it is powerful in a very different way.
Well, and
Yeah.
okay, so this is exciting to me because, I mean, first let me do this for a minute. A very cartoonish version of what happened here. Being me, I thought we're going to ask that question, that second question, what's happening around classrooms, and I thought, what's going to come out of this is a rubric. But it didn't. For a couple reasons. First, the first big pattern in these classrooms was the question about purpose is part of education. We never even looked for that in TAL because the purpose was assumed. Can you read and write well enough to get into college? Right? The purpose was coming from me or coming from other people, but it was not a question. In the outlier, what do economists call them? Positive deviance, right? If you put Pooja in a classroom with wisdom, in a classroom with Taylor Delhagen, he was one of the people I met studying him about this stuff, they all say, well, we have to be having a conversation with students and families about what education is for. Every one of them. So that's not a rubric. The second thing, huge pattern, was that when we asked them, how did you become who you are? And we made them map all these things. You might have been there, Nalika. Were you at that thing in London where we did those things? That's kind of cool. It was like I don't know what to call it, an aha, oh shit moment for me. Like what we did, we had all the partner organizations send some of their strongest teachers. I gave them a big sheet of paper and we made them make a graph. And we said, and the bottom was time and the y-axis was whatever we're going to tell you. Graph how much you think your students have learned in your first, second, third, fourth year of teaching. And they would do something like this. Graph how confident you felt. Graph how fulfilling you felt. Graph whether your students are learning academically. All these things, right? There's all these squiggly lines. We put them all around the wall. I have pictures of this. There wasn't a single graph that was a gradual up and down, right? The teacher's like, shoom, boom, 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 up, down, whatever. So then we go and we circle those inflection points and we say, what happened right there? Because you're here because you're having a dramatic impact in the life of your students. And something happened somewhere, it looks like 1.75 years. What happened, right? And, please say you read Teaching's Leadership. Please say you read Teaching's Leadership. Mm-hmm. No one said it was a professional development. Every time there was some traumatic experience that changed their perspective. Those weren't the words. They say, well, that's when my student died. Or that's when a student that I thought was lost just excelled and I thought, what am I doing here? Or whatever. Or Taylor Delhagen, I don't know if you all know, he's walking around out there. His map, it was like the 2 weeks after his first year in the summer, shot up. And he said, yeah, no, that's when I became a real teacher. And I was like, what'd you do? Did you go to some seminar or whatever? He said, no, I was exhausted. I'd had my first year. Everyone was telling me I was such a good teacher and I felt so good. And I was just so exhausted that I went for like 2 or 3 hour walks every single day. And I was walking in the community where my students lived. And every day I thought more and more that nothing I was doing mattered to my kids. It was like I just could not go back and do it again. And that's when it changed, right? So it was like reflection on something that shifted perspective. And so we tried to map, we called them lenses. People's lenses were changing. I mean, some of you probably know Gaurav Singh. I don't know, like he was one of those teachers, we mapped this. And he said, when Teach for India made me go spend the day doing the work of one of my students' parents, that's when I became the teacher that I am. And he went, I don't even understand this, it was like sorting garbage and stuff. And he said, I'm doing it all day. And the first half of the day, I was angry. Who would ever do this? And somewhere in the mid-afternoon, I realized, wait, if I'd been born here, I would be doing this. And then I realized, oh my gosh, my students are me. But it took a really provocative experience and reflection to shift his perspective. And I think the most important part of this, the part that is so different from teaching as leadership, is this green stuff. Every time we find one of these positive deviant classrooms, those teachers say, I became the teacher I am when I actually started internalize the ideas that my students are leaders today, right now. And before, I sort of thought, yeah, that's cute. But when I really believed that, that changed. And when I realized I'm the learner in the classroom. I saw that last night, right? Those teachers got up there with their former students who are now teachers, and they were saying, I think we learned more from them than they did with us. You see that every single time, right? Most rubrics don't give space for that. Anyway, you see them. That community is a source of power, that the work is systemic. This is a radical challenge to those of us that are in teacher training. Because this is not knowledge and skill building. This is mindset shifting and perspective shifting. And you don't tell people to do it and it happens. You don't practice it. You have to have dramatic, sometimes painful, sometimes successful experiences, and you have to reflect to make new meaning because you've internalized the system you have. You have internalized to some degree that students are empty vessels to be filled up by their teacher. You have internalized to some degree that chaos is bad, that noise is bad, that noise can't be learning, right? We all have to some degree internalized these things, and that's the self-work, I think, that is just really hard to turn into the concrete piece. But I've learned more from Teach for India than any other organization about this. So this feels really weird to be sharing this back to you all. But it's true, right? My first trip to India, like I had heard of Shaheen, I'm meeting Shaheen. It's the first day of Institute. I'm here. In our first day of Institute, I'm like, we are going to have learned to lesson plan by noon. I do, we do, you do, 5-step lesson plan, let's go. I get to the first day of Institute, they put me on a bus, they give me a yellow hat, they send me out into a community, and they say you don't get a ride home until you make a connection with a kid. And honestly, I was angry. I was like, this is such a waste of time. What are you doing? Really, I was. And I wasn't in a place to be able to see the value of it. And I wasn't even in a place to be able to hear it when somebody, staff member, said to me, we live in the shadow of the caste system in this country. And unless we work on undoing that in ourselves and our fellows, we do not see our own students as the same as us, and we can never have learning. And this was one of those examples of I couldn't appreciate that for 10 years. But that kind of experience doesn't lend itself to the institute that I was designing, right? So those lenses are a big, big deal that are very hard to do what you're talking about, but we have to, and the learning theory for adults is just different for those. When you get on the other side, you see all these actions. This is where I'm going to, I hope, meet you, maybe. Yeah. I'm happy, I'll find the link and share it with you. We have crowdsourced what you said you liked about the TAL rubric, the website. You can go online My colleague called it like if a wiki and an ebook had a baby. But basically, people all around the world are saying, oh, this is how I did this one in my context. And so it's like a bulletin board. And you can see little videos or little stories. And every day I go and it's a little bit different. And it's like this emerging conversation because a lot of people are doing this. It's just they have to do it in secret or they're getting in trouble. Because our systems don't allow for the connections and love that we're talking about. They don't allow for some of these. Some of these things are pretty similar to teaching as leadership, but you still get reflect and grow. Like you get the CIE. Working relentlessly is not on here. Because what we hear from these teachers, again, some of you know, I'll stop naming names, was like, well, no. Working relentlessly is a result of this stuff. It's not, don't tell me to work relentlessly. Like you have to think of putting working relentlessly and holding me accountable to that doesn't make sense. If I build relationship with kids and we have a purpose together, it's the result of that. And when you put it on here and say, check that box, it has no meaning at all. And so it didn't make it on here, right? But there was a lot of discussion you were in some of those conversations. So that's where we are right now. Like we've got a bunch of resources. None of this matters really. I'm trying to decide, like, what do you do with this? Does a book make any sense? I don't know. Like somehow we have to share this in actionable ways, and it's a little more complex than teaching as leadership was, but that's the puzzle right now. And by the way, if anyone wants to do that, call me. That's like what we're trying to do. And I'll quick commercial again. I'm going to pass around a document about it, but I'm very excited that we've just got a bunch of funding from a bunch of people in Singapore, one of whom was here last night. I was pretty nervous, but I think he liked it. But we're going to start something called the Global Institute for Shaping a Better Future that is an attempt to create kind of a virtual global grad school of education built on learning from positive deviance in the system, right? So this kind of thing, make it something that we all can you can have a place where if you're doing that, you have a community, because what we hear from people is, I just feel like I'm alone. And I'm talking about where this is going to be open to people beyond our network. And that is also going to be different. Sorry, I took way too much time with that. We have a website that sort of is trying to do what you're doing, but it's all very raw, and it's kind of where we are with this.
Yeah, I think let's
open it all up.
Yeah, we're going to open it up to everyone now. So whatever you're sitting with, whatever you want to ask, feel free to just jump in and ask questions.
Yeah.
Figure out how to go about the non-basis. I'm just wondering, how do you coach? Generally, the reason why a lot of people, and including me, I'm a big fan of use TEL because it's just easy for a coach to use and easy for a teacher to use. And we have seen, specifically in fellowship model, is that when teachers are struggling, they want to see those immediate results, and TEL allows for that. And whenever I have coached my teachers on some of these elements, which is like taking care of self, I've seen them continuously deprioritizing those practices above others because they don't see results that quickly in those. And I think it comes from their own conditioning because they have, as children, have gone through a system which is very direct, right? So there is a lot of unlearning. So in that process, and as a coach also, who has also gone through the similar system, right? So there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen everywhere.
Yeah.
So in a system like that, from a coach's point of view, somebody who's like a teacher, coach, or a trainer, how do we use this? Like, how do we start?
Okay. Yeah, let's take more questions. Yeah. So I've got it. Coaching. Flag that. I can point you to some things, but the answer is I don't know. What are some? Let's get a bunch of thoughts and questions on the table.
Anyone?
Yeah.
I'm going to just leave this in the center.
I'll leave it there. On very similar lines on what Ankit also asked, like till last year we were using this 5-step lesson plan, just like you said, I do, we do, you do, and that was like so much easier to understand as like we were all fellows with non-teaching background, and it was very easy for us to bring outcomes. Now it has changed to the 5 magic questions, and this was also the year I entered the staff team, and I'm able to realize that okay, this is easier for me to understand because I've like taught for 2 years, but how do I drive that in the fellows who are just coming in, just done with the institute? So this was something that I had been sharing with Ankit also. So yeah, if you could shed some light on that, how to go about it, would be really helpful.
I just came from the session on it.
So I have a question around the lenses that you shared, right? That everybody that you've had an encounter with us said that there was something that happened that transformed what was going on, and that was not something that happened through professional development or not something that happened through going at a seminar or attending something, but some life experiences that happened. Is it even possible for every teacher to have that kind of a moment, right? Like where they're like, oh, okay, this has really happened and now this is going to transform the way I think. Like some of the names that you took are very transformational teachers who maybe sort of reflected on what was happening. But how do we scale this to all teachers or most teachers is one thing that I'm thinking about. And second is, can we as coaches or people who work with teachers and sort of help shape that for them, create those kind of spaces for them, create this kind of experiences for them that allows them to sort of experience transformation within like just these are 2 things that I'm thinking about.
Thank you.
Just going to add to the experiences bit. Key in that process of creating experiences for people, we are also noticing that because people see the meaning in those experiences only in hindsight. So we are seeing people denying those experiences. And this has come out in institute and other as well. Like people are not open to visiting communities because in that moment it doesn't feel useful. Like you also shared your experience. So, and I know you don't have a clear answer right now, but what can be the approach that we can take?
And just last thing I'll add is my hope is that this question is on other people's minds as well, which is why I'm sharing it. But I think very honestly, Stephen, I feel like post-pandemic, I know at some point we say, excellence is not just academic outcomes, but at this point, like a few years post-pandemic, I feel like our children have been hit so hard that those of us who've supported grade 9 and 10 classrooms, which is like the national, like the board exams, it has been an absolute struggle, right? And we've lost classrooms in the 9th grade because we weren't able to show academic growth. So it's not to say, we're only driving academic growth. It's say we're trying to drive everything, but we're not even at this point. It's not that we're making a choice. We're not even attaining that. In many of our classrooms, I won't say all, that is on my mind. I think, like I would say, at least for Teach for India, it is part of our fabric to continue to provide experiences that are disorienting, to hold learning circles, to push people to think. And simultaneously, there are points where a quick fix just feels like this is needed now. So when we were about to have I won't mention the percentage, but a large percentage of our kids in a particular city last year were about to they weren't clearing their prelim exams before the boards. We went back to TAL and we said now, let's not question anything. A lot depends on this. And what we didn't stop is to say continue to connect deeply, right? These kids at this point, it is the most important for them to feel invested in this process. It's important for their families to feel like this is valuable, for them to see hope. All of that was part of what we did, but some of our quick fixes came from TLAC, came from TAL, and that was it was just incredibly valuable. So it's not a
It was
question.
keep saying it, incredibly valuable to what? To what end?
To help them cross this one this one sort of like milestone that actually does mean a lot to our children.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's short-term gateways.
Yeah. There are
And to
places
get
where
there
it's
fast,
required. Yeah.
You know, I was in a school, and I mean, this is going to sound so critical. I absolutely accept that. I was in a classroom in China, which has the most draconian academic achievement gateways that I've ever seen, right? There's like 50 chairs in the 6th grade, and there's 40 in the 7th, and there's 30 in the 8th grade, and if you don't score, you're out of school, right? And every child in this classroom, they sit by their score, right? So the kid who got the worst score is the last kid in the back. So I'm sitting by the last kid in the back, and they had a assessment coming up that was, it was just a paragraph in English, and it would determine whether they go on to the next year. These kids could not read and write, learn English. The teacher, because the stakes were so high, was teaching them to memorize the shapes so that they could draw words with no knowledge at all because the stakes were so high, right? What do we make of that story, right? You're living in a system that if they can't do that, they don't get to have another chance. So is that teacher doing the right thing? Maybe, probably, I don't know. But I think I believe that you don't have, that two things. Do I believe this? I don't know. I think I believe that going through TLAC and TAL is not the path to teaching as collective leadership. I don't think it's like we have to get the academic achievement so we can do that. In fact, I think it's counterproductive because I think we as educators and as students start to internalize the lack of agency, the lack of connectedness, and that the long-term costs are higher than we think they are when we do that. There are people I know and love who really disagree with me about that, who think, no, you get that foundation, and then you add this on top. I will say that is not what the teachers we study say. They don't say it's like, figure out TAL, and then you can add, or Doug Lemov, and then you can add on top, because those things get in the way, actually, of full education. I think we're struggling here because nobody knows, not because we don't know. I think we live on a planet where education has not been for this purpose ever. So of course this is hard, right? Like it's not, we should not feel like someone's hiding something from us. The purpose of education has been to maintain divisions of power and privilege between groups of people on planet Earth. I do actually believe that. I didn't used to believe that. Now going to places all around the world, that's what I believe education is for. I think if Jane Goodall came down and studied us and was trying to define what is education, that's what she would say it was. So let's give ourselves the grace to say we've got to learn our way to this. That's all we can do. We have these moments, you do what you've got to do, absolutely. But somewhere in there is someone who got to those near gateways differently, and we're going to find them, and we're going to learn from them. And I don't know what else there is. And when we do that, it pulls us to this very different way of doing it. And then we get into all these challenges of systemic change. How are we going to change systems that are so entrenched? And when something like the pandemic happens, we rush backwards. That's what's happening in the United States right now. One camp says, see, we got to go back to accountability. You got to take away art. You've got to take away PE. We've got to extend the day because kids are behind. They're further behind. And other people are saying, no, the lesson here is that well-being matters. But that's the fight, right? I don't know the answers to it, but I'm just so convinced that if we perfect what we're doing, it's not good, right? It's not good for my daughters. It's not good for our future. So what choice do we have? We've got to like find those people that are doing it differently, learn, and that's really all I've got on all of this. Real quickly, just on the coaching sort of stuff, it's not my area of expertise. I do have some colleagues who have made something called teacher coaching as collective leadership using this by studying pairs of teachers and coaches where a teacher who was far behind, not doing well, had really just became great. What are they doing? And we've got some of that stuff. I'm again happy to share it. We're going to try to make a platform to share these sorts of things. I will say, I mean, coaching is so hard anyway. Like, I just think it's a fool's game to try to make it easy, right? Like, I think that's the first thing you say. It's just not. It's not going to be easy. It's human work. Can I see this thing again? Like one more thing about that time in London. Does anybody know who Charlotte Danielson is? She, what's it called? The effective teacher. The effective teacher. She's like the grandmother of all teacher rubrics, right? She like made the one, went all around the world. Everyone who's ever made a rubric is copying her. This is true. She's made, I'm not kidding, $1 billion or something off of it. And she was there with us. You were there. I don't know if you were at the table when she said this. We're doing stuff like this. And Charlotte Danielson, of all people, like she's made all this money. She says, you know, rubrics are actually only good for the person who made them. Like, well, holy crap, you know, here I'm spending my whole time making these things. You are selling them. But that's what I think this is about. If you take this, and if you're a teacher and I'm a coach, and I get to know you well enough to know what your strengths are outside the classroom, then I am going to circle these 3 things or areas where you're strong outside the classroom, and that's where we're going to go. You are going to lean into your strengths, and we're not going to worry about these others. Now, I might get to know you a little bit more to say there's a couple things that you really struggle with, you're not very organized. That's going to hold you back. I'm going to pick 2 things. That's it. That's all we're going to do. This isn't like, can you do all these things? It's, how do we lean into your strengths, and how is this going to help you reflect on what you can work on? And that's it. That's coaching. Like, and I don't think there's more than that. Or I don't know what more than that is.
Monica, you wanted to share something?
What's the time?
We're at closing, but I know that you wanted to share something.
Yeah, no, I realized it was close to closing time. So, I mean, I just wanted to say, I don't know if I was a facilitator, learner. I don't know. I don't know what role I play in, but I feel definitely more learner than facilitator in this space today. And I think if there's one thing I know is that if I spend a little time with Stephen, I'm going to walk away with more questions than answers, which is what I think people are probably feeling today as well. But those questions, if held long enough, I feel like they've always been valuable to think about. So thank you for that. Just
Thank
wanted
you.
to say that.
Thank you for having me.
And if we just have 2 minutes, and just taking from that cue of like, it might be that a lot of us are walking away with questions and taking into that idea of the collective. Would love to hear from just 2 people, I think more from this side of the room because I've not heard that voice. Just what are you walking away with? And what, it could be a question, it could be an insight, but what is something that you're walking away with today from this space? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think
Yeah, sure.
one thing that definitely I was walking away with is the different perspectives which probably as an individual I would not have looked at. And maybe look at them and reflect on myself on those perspectives and see where do I stand. And then take this as a starting point and see what could be implemented, what could be taken up, because I totally understand everything is not possible. If I try everything, it's like a waste. So pick up one, see what your strengths are, see what your weaknesses are, pick up 2 of them, start with 2 and move on. That is how the movement would start slowly. And as I keep moving on, I keep improving myself, keep reflecting more, maybe I'll find a better way to merge things together, link things together, maybe add more my experience to it and help others if I could. Yeah, that's it.
Me, one more person to just share and close us out.
I don't know. I think recently I've been really struggling with this whole idea of students' well-being, my own well-being, and what is the break-even point there? Like, at what level can you push your students where they're also like you're not also holding them back, but also the well-being is not getting in the way where you're pushing them back. And I think recently, line has been a little blurry for me because I have been pushing myself a lot with the whole exam season and the extra classes they are coming every day. And at the larger end, I'm also feeling very bad because I'm also getting there, but they're also like struggling and working really hard. And this session really has put a lot of insight inside me with related to the well-being part in the whole. It really made me think that what are we here for? Aren't we here for their well-being only? Like the whole point of everything that we do is to have their well-being in the place, but often gets as a second priority over academic achievement or any other goals that we have set. So I think the one insight that I am taking back is to know that their well-being is the entire point of everything that we do in the fellowship and how to we just balance it out while we are also fellowship.
Thank you so much. That's
Thank you.
the strong, keeping the purpose at the center. So thank you all for being here. And if you have any questions or want to hang back, please go ahead. But thank you all so much. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nalika.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.